The November rain drummed against the windshield of my Honda as I sat in the church parking lot, watching the drops race down the glass like the tears I refused to let fall. 40 years on this earth had taught me that some moments define you, split your life into before and after. This was one of those moments. I hadn't planned to be here. 20 minutes earlier, I'd been at home in our downtown Chicago apartment, folding laundry and wondering why Michael had been working so many late nights at the firm. The text message on his phone, the phone he'd carelessly left on the kitchen counter, had changed everything. Same place as last week, behind St. Mark's at 8. The sender was listed as A. Parker. I didn't know any A. Parker. Michael had never mentioned anyone by that name in all our 15 years of marriage. My hands had trembled as I'd grabbed my keys and driven through the city streets, past the familiar landmarks of our shared life. The Willis Tower piercing the cloudy sky, the coffee shop where we'd had our first date, the park where he proposed. Each mile felt like a countdown to something I wasn't ready to face. Now, parked across from St. Mark's Episcopal Church on the south side, I watched the back parking lot through my rearview mirror. The church was a beautiful old brick building, its Gothic windows glowing warmly in the evening darkness. I'd driven past it countless times but never really noticed it before. How many other things had I failed to notice? At exactly 8:03 p.m., Michael's silver BMW pulled into the lot behind the church. My heart hammered against my ribs as I watched him park in the shadows, away from the street lights. He sat there for a moment, checking his phone, adjusting his tie, the same nervous gestures I'd seen him make before important presentations. Then another car arrived, a red Mazda I didn't recognize. The woman who stepped out was younger than me, maybe early 30s, with long blonde hair that caught the light from the church windows. She wore a black coat that looked expensive, and she moved with the confidence of someone who knew she was wanted. Even from a distance, I could see she was beautiful in that effortless way some women possessed. I watched as she walked to Michael's car and slipped into the passenger seat. Through the rear window, I could see them talking, their heads close together. The intimacy of their body language told me everything I needed to know, but I stayed frozen in my seat, as if witnessing it with my own eyes might somehow make it less real. After what felt like hours but was probably only 10 minutes, they got out of the front seats. That's when my world truly collapsed. She climbed into the back seat of his car and he followed. The car rocked slightly. The windows fogged. I sat there in the November cold, engine off, watching my marriage die in a church parking lot. The irony wasn't lost on me. Here was my husband, the man who'd promised to love and honor me before God, betraying those vows literally in the shadow of a house of worship. My phone buzzed. A text from Michael. Working late again tonight. Don't wait up. Love you. The casual cruelty of those words, love you, after what I just witnessed made my stomach lurch. I fumbled for my door handle and barely made it to the curb before I vomited, my body rejecting this new reality as violently as my mind was trying to. When I finally composed myself enough to look back, both cars were gone. The parking lot was empty except for a few scattered leaves dancing in the wind. It was as if nothing had happened, as if the last 30 minutes had been some terrible dream. But the image was burned into my memory. The back seat, the fogged windows, the woman's blonde hair catching the church light. And Michael, my Michael choosing her over everything we'd built together. I drove home through the city streets in a daze, past late-night diners and glowing apartment windows where other people were living their normal lives. When I pulled into the underground garage of our building, I sat in my car for a long time, staring at Michael's empty parking space and trying to figure out how to walk into our apartment and pretend I didn't know what I knew. The elevator ride to the 14th floor felt endless. Each floor that passed was another step deeper into this new version of my life, the one where I was the wife who'd been betrayed, the woman who wasn't enough, the fool who'd trusted completely. Our apartment looked exactly the same as when I'd left it an hour ago, but everything felt different. The wedding photos on the mantel, the couch where we watched movies together, the bed we shared, it all felt contaminated by what I'd witnessed. I poured myself a glass of wine with shaking hands and stood at our living room window, looking out at the Chicago skyline. The city sparkled below me, millions of lights representing millions of lives, and I wondered how many other women were standing at windows tonight, discovering that their lives weren't what they thought they were. The wine tasted bitter, or maybe that was just the taste of betrayal in my mouth. I thought about calling my sister Rebecca in Seattle, but what would I say? That I'd followed my husband like some desperate character from a soap opera? That I'd sat in a parking lot watching him cheat on me and done nothing to stop it? My reflection in the window showed a woman I barely recognized, pale, hollow-eyed, suddenly looking every one of her 40 years. When had I become someone so easily discarded? When had I stopped being the woman Michael had fallen in love with? The questions multiplied in my mind like a cancer. How long had this been going on? Was she the first? Did his colleagues know? Our friends? Had I been walking through my life as the only person who didn't know the truth about my own marriage? At 11:47 p.m., I heard Michael's key in the door. I quickly rinsed my wine glass and pretended to be reading on the couch, though the words on the page might as well have been in a foreign language. "Hey, sweetheart," he said, dropping his briefcase by the door and loosening his tie, the same tie I'd watched him adjust in the church parking lot. "You didn't have to wait up." He leaned down to kiss the top of my head, and I smelled her perfume in his hair. Something floral and expensive, nothing like the subtle vanilla scent I'd worn for years. "How was your meeting?" I asked, proud of how normal my voice sounded. "Long and boring," he said, heading toward the bedroom. "Morrison's being difficult about the Peterson account. You know how it is." I didn't know how it was. I knew the names of his clients, his colleagues, his cases. I knew he liked his coffee black, that he was afraid of spiders, that he cried during sad movies even though he tried to hide it. I knew everything about this man, except that he was capable of lying to my face so easily. "I'm going to shower," he called from the bedroom. "Coming to bed soon." "In a few minutes," I replied, though I knew I wouldn't sleep tonight. How could I lie next to him, feeling the warmth of his body, knowing where he'd been and what he'd done? As the shower ran, I sat on our couch and stared at the wedding photo on the side table. We looked so young, so happy, so certain of our future together. I touched the glass, tracing my younger self's smile, and wondered if that woman would have been strong enough to handle what was coming next. Outside, the city hummed with its endless energy, indifferent to the small tragedy playing out in apartment 1404. Somewhere out there, Parker was probably going to sleep satisfied, maybe even smug. And tomorrow, Michael would wake up and kiss me goodbye and go to work, carrying his secret like it weighed nothing at all. But I would wake up different. I would wake up knowing. And somehow, I would have to figure out what to do with that knowledge. 3 days passed in a surreal haze of normalcy. Michael made coffee in the morning, kissed me goodbye, and left for work while I got ready for my job at the Northwestern Memorial Hospital, where I'd been a nurse in the cardiac unit for 8 years. We had dinner together, watched the news, discussed weekend plans. To anyone looking from the outside, we were just another married couple navigating the routine of a Wednesday evening in November. But I felt like I was living underwater, moving through each interaction with a strange detachment. Every time Michael spoke to me, every casual "how was your day" felt like another small betrayal. I caught myself studying his face, searching for signs of guilt or deception, but found only the familiar features of the man I'd loved for nearly 2 decades. The worst part was how attentive he'd become. He brought me flowers on Tuesday, white roses from the shop near his office. He suggested we try that new Italian restaurant in Lincoln Park. He even offered to do the grocery shopping, something he usually avoided. It was as if his guilt had made him a better husband, which somehow made everything worse. Thursday morning, I couldn't take it anymore. After Michael left for work, I called in sick, something I rarely did, and drove back to St. Mark's Church. In the daylight, it looked different. Less ominous, more like what it actually was, a peaceful place of worship in a neighborhood that had seen better days but still retained its dignity. I parked in the same spot where I'd sat 3 nights earlier and stared at the back lot. In the sunshine, it was just an empty patch of asphalt with a few parking spaces and a dumpster. No evidence of what I'd witnessed. No scarlet letters painted on the ground. A woman emerged from the church's side entrance, elderly, silver-haired, wearing a cardigan despite the mild November day. She noticed me sitting in my car and approached with the kind of smile that suggested she'd spent decades welcoming strangers. "Are you looking for someone, dear?" she asked through my roll-down window. "I'm not sure," I said, which was probably the most honest thing I'd said to anyone in days. "I'm Eleanor Hartwell," she said. "I've been the secretary here for 15 years. If there's anything I can help with..." Something about her genuine kindness made my carefully constructed composure crack. "Do you ever see cars parked back there at night?" I asked, nodding toward the rear lot. Eleanor's expression shifted slightly, becoming more guarded. "Sometimes. We don't encourage it, but—" She studied my face more carefully. "Is everything all right?" "I think my husband is having an affair," I heard myself say. The words hung in the air between us, like a confession I hadn't meant to make. Eleanor's face softened with understanding. She'd probably heard the story before, I realized. Churches attracted all kinds of human drama. "Would you like to come inside? I can make some tea." 20 minutes later, I found myself in a small office filled with religious books and family photos, holding a mug of chamomile tea and telling a stranger about the worst moment of my life. Eleanor listened without judgment, occasionally nodding or making small sounds of sympathy. "What's his name?" she asked when I finished. "Michael. Michael Torres. And the woman? I don't know. Someone named A. Parker, according to his phone." Eleanor was quiet for a moment, her fingers drumming softly on her desk. "Amanda Parker," she said finally. "She's been coming to our Wednesday evening services for about 3 months. Always sits in the back, always leaves right after. Beautiful girl, but troubled, I think. I've tried to engage her in conversation, but she keeps to herself." The confirmation that A. Parker was real, was someone who existed in the world beyond my worst fears, hit me like a physical blow. Wednesday evening services, 7 to 8 p.m. She always arrives exactly at 7 and leaves the moment the service ends. Eleanor leaned forward. "The back parking lot is right outside our fellowship hall. People sometimes," she trailed off delicately. "So that was it. Michael wasn't just cheating on me. He was using a church service as cover for his affair." The calculated nature of it made me feel sick all over again. "What should I do?" I asked, hating how lost I sounded. Eleanor was quiet for a long moment. "That's not for me to say, dear. But I will tell you this in my experience. The truth has a way of demanding to be acknowledged. You can't unknow what you know." I drove home with Eleanor's words echoing in my head. The truth has a way of demanding to be acknowledged. But what did acknowledgement look like? A confrontation? A divorce lawyer? Moving out? The possibilities stretched ahead of me like a maze with no clear path. That evening, Michael came home with Chinese takeout from our favorite place in Chinatown. We ate lo mein and sweet and sour chicken while he told me about his day, about a difficult client, about office politics. Normal conversation between a normal married couple. "You seem quiet tonight," he said, refilling my wine glass. "Everything okay at the hospital?" "Just tired," I lied. "Long day." He reached across the table and took my hand. His fingers were warm and familiar, the same hands that had held mine during my mother's funeral, that had rubbed my back when I was sick, that had traced my face in the dark during countless nights of intimacy. "Maybe we should plan a vacation," he said. "It's been a while since we got away together. Remember that trip to Napa we talked about? The cruelty of it was breathtaking." Here he was, planning romantic getaways while conducting an affair behind a church. Did he think a weekend in wine country would somehow balance the scales? Did he imagine that booking a nice hotel would make up for the betrayal? "That sounds nice," I managed to say. After dinner, we settled onto the couch to watch Netflix. Michael pulled me against his side in the way he'd done thousands of times before, and I let him, even though his touch now felt like a lie against my skin. We watched some mindless romantic comedy, and I wondered if the irony was as apparent to him as it was to me. Later, in bed, he reached for me in the dark. His hands moved across my body with practiced familiarity, and for a moment I almost gave in to the comfort of routine. But then I imagined those same hands on Amanda Parker's skin, just hours earlier, and I gently turned away. "Headache," I whispered. "Poor baby," he murmured, kissing my shoulder. "Get some rest." I lay awake long after his breathing deepened into sleep, staring at the ceiling and trying to reconcile the man beside me with the man I'd seen in the church parking lot. How was it possible for someone to compartmentalize so completely? How could he touch me with the same hands that had touched her? The next morning was Friday, and Michael was in an unusually good mood. He hummed while he shaved, kissed me goodbye with more enthusiasm than usual, and mentioned he might be late again that evening. "Another client dinner?" I asked. "Something like that," he said, not quite meeting my eyes. After he left, I sat at our kitchen table with my coffee and stared out at the Chicago skyline. The city looked crisp and clean in the morning light, full of possibility and promise. But all I could think about was the decision I had to make. I could confront him directly, demand the truth, and watch our marriage implode in real time. I could pretend I'd never seen anything and try to go back to the life we'd built, though I wasn't sure that was even possible now. I could gather evidence, document the affair, and prepare for the divorce I was increasingly certain was inevitable. Or I could do something else entirely. My phone buzzed with a text message. For a wild moment, I thought it might be from Amanda Parker, as if my thinking about her had somehow summoned her into my life. But it was just my sister Rebecca in Seattle, asking about Thanksgiving plans. "Are you and Michael coming out this year? The kids are asking about Uncle Mike." I stared at the message for a long time before typing back. "Still figuring out our plans. I'll let you know soon." It occurred to me that this might be the last Thanksgiving Michael and I spent together as a married couple. The thought should have devastated me, but instead, it felt strangely liberating, as if acknowledging the possibility of an ending had somehow freed me from the prison of pretending everything was normal. I had a choice to make, and for the first time since Tuesday night, I felt ready to make it. Saturday morning arrived gray and cold, with the kind of Chicago wind that cut through your coat and settled in your bones. Michael was at his usual weekend basketball game with college friends, or at least, that's where he said he was going. I'd stopped taking anything at face value. I spent the morning cleaning our apartment with an intensity that surprised me, scrubbing the bathroom tiles until they gleamed, organizing the closets, washing every dish in the cabinet. It was the kind of deep cleaning you do before guests arrive, or before moving out, and I wasn't sure which category this fell into. Around noon, my phone rang. Rebecca's name appeared on the screen, and for a moment I considered letting it go to voicemail. But my sister had always been able to read my moods, even from 2,000 miles away. "Okay, what's wrong?" she said without preamble when I answered. "Why would something be wrong?" "Because you texted me back about Thanksgiving in 3 words, and you've been married to Michael for 15 years. If you were coming, you'd have already booked the flights and started planning what to bring for dinner. If you weren't coming, you'd have given me some elaborate explanation about work schedules and Chicago weather. 3 words means crisis." This was why Rebecca was a successful corporate lawyer in Seattle, and why I'd never been able to hide anything from her, even as children. She could dissect evasion like a surgeon removing a tumor. I told her everything. The text message, the church parking lot, Amanda Parker, the lies, the flowers, the way Michael's touch now felt like betrayal. She listened without interrupting, occasionally making small sounds of sympathy or outrage. "Jesus, Claire," she said when I finished. "What are you going to do?" "I don't know. Part of me wants to pretend I never saw anything. Just go back to how things were." "Can you do that?" "Realistically." I thought about the past few days, about the way I'd analyzed every word Michael spoke, every gesture he made, about how I'd lain awake at night replaying the image of his car rocking gently in that church parking lot. "No," I admitted. "I can't unknow what I know." "Then you have to confront him. What if he denies it? What if he says I imagined it, or misunderstood what I saw?" "Then you trust your eyes over his words," Rebecca said firmly. "Claire, I've seen you handle medical emergencies, make split-second decisions that save people's lives. You're not some naive girl who doesn't know what she saw. You witnessed your husband cheating on you. That's not ambiguous." After we hung up, I sat in our quiet apartment and tried to imagine the conversation. How do you ask someone you've loved for 20 years if they're betraying you? What words do you use? How do you prepare for the moment when they either admit the truth or lie to your face? Michael came home around 3, sweaty and energized from his basketball game. He kissed my cheek and headed for the shower, chattering about how his team had won and how one of his friends was getting divorced. "Tom says it's been coming for years," he called from the bathroom over the sound of running water. Apparently Jessica found out he'd been having an affair with someone from his office. Can you imagine? After 18 years of marriage, the irony was so thick I could barely breathe. Was he really discussing infidelity while the scent of another woman's perfume was probably still in his hair? "That's terrible," I called back, my voice sounding strange in my ears. "I know, right? I can't understand how someone could do that to their spouse." The lies, the betrayal. It's like they become a completely different person. I gripped the edge of the kitchen counter, so hard my knuckles went white. The casual hypocrisy of his words was staggering. Was he really lecturing me about the awfulness of adultery while conducting his own affair? Or was this his way of testing me, seeing if I knew something? When he emerged from the shower, hair damp, and wearing his favorite weekend clothes, he looked so much like the man I'd fallen in love with that my resolve wavered. This was Michael, my Michael, who brought me soup when I was sick, who remembered every anniversary, who'd held my hand during my father's heart surgery. "Want to go out for dinner tonight?" he asked. "That new steakhouse downtown." "Actually," I heard myself say, "I think we need to talk." Something in my tone must have alerted him, because his expression shifted from casual contentment to wariness. Talk about what? I'd rehearsed this moment in my mind dozens of times over the past few days, but now that it was here, all my prepared words evaporated. Instead, I found myself walking to his briefcase, removing his phone, and setting it on the coffee table between us. "Who is A. Parker?" I asked. The color drained from Michael's face, so completely that for a moment I thought he might faint. His mouth opened and closed without sound, and he sat down heavily on the couch as if his legs could no longer support him. "Claire, I can explain." "Who is A. Parker?" I repeated, my voice steadier than I'd expected. She's a client. Amanda Parker. She's going through a difficult divorce, and... Do you meet all your divorce clients in church parking lots? The lie died on his lips. I watched him realize that I knew, really knew, not just suspected. His shoulders sagged, and suddenly he looked older than his 42 years. "How long have you known?" he asked quietly. "Since Tuesday. I saw you. Behind St. Mark's Church." Michael put his head in his hands, and for a moment the only sound in our apartment was the distant hum of Chicago traffic far below. When he finally looked up, his eyes were red-rimmed. "It's not what you think," he said. "It's exactly what I think," I replied. "I saw you get in the back seat of your car with her, Michael. I saw the windows fog up. Unless you were conducting a very unusual client meeting, it's exactly what I think." He was quiet for a long moment, staring at his hands. When he spoke again, his voice was barely above a whisper. "How long?" I asked. 3 months. 3 months. While I'd been working extra shifts at the hospital to help pay for the renovation of our kitchen. While we'd been planning our anniversary dinner. While I'd been worrying about his stress levels and encouraging him to take better care of himself. "Do you love her?" The question hung between us like a blade. Michael's hesitation was answer enough, but I needed to hear him say it. "I don't know," he said finally. "It's complicated. It's not complicated, Michael. Either you love her or you don't." "I love you," he said, and there were tears in his voice now. "I've always loved you. This thing with Amanda, it just happened. She was vulnerable, going through this terrible divorce, and I was working late so many nights on her case, and we started talking, and you decided to fuck her in a church parking lot." My crude language seemed to shock him more than my knowledge of the affair. In 15 years of marriage, I'd never spoken to him like that. But then again, in 15 years of marriage, he'd never betrayed me like this. "It wasn't supposed to happen," he said. "It just evolved. And once it started, I didn't know how to stop it." "You didn't want to stop it." "You're right," he admitted. "I didn't want to stop it. She makes me feel young again. Desired. Like I'm not just a 42-year-old lawyer with a mortgage and thinning hair." The honesty of his words was somehow worse than the lies had been. At least when he was lying, I could maintain the illusion that our marriage meant something to him. This casual dismissal of our life together, this midlife crisis cliché, was devastating in its banality. "So what now?" I asked. "I'll end it," he said quickly. "Tonight. I'll call her and tell her it's over. We can go to counseling, work through this. Lots of couples recover from affairs. We can be stronger than before." I looked at this man I'd shared my life with, this stranger who'd become so skilled at deception, and felt something inside me finally break free. Not break apart, break free. Like a bird that had been caged for so long it had forgotten it could fly. "No," I said. "What do you mean, no?" "I mean no, Michael. I don't want to recover from this. I don't want to spend the next 5 years in counseling sessions wondering if you're telling me the truth about where you've been and who you've been with. I don't want to have to rebuild trust with someone who looked me in the eye every day for 3 months while he was lying to me. Claire, please. We can fix this. I know I fucked up, but— You didn't fuck up, I interrupted. You made a choice. Every day for 3 months, you chose her over me. You chose to lie to me, to betray our vows, to risk everything we'd built together. That wasn't a mistake, Michael. That was a decision. He was crying now, tears streaming down his face. I choose you. I'm choosing you now. Too late, I said, and was surprised by how calm I sounded. I deserve better than being someone's second choice. I deserve better than having to compete with your client for my own husband's attention. What are you saying? I looked around our apartment, at the life we'd created together, at the man I'd loved for so long he'd become part of my identity. Mrs. Michael Torres. Michael's wife. Half of a couple that everyone thought was so solid, so happy. I'm saying I want a divorce. The words fell between us like stones into still water, creating ripples that would spread outward and touch every corner of our shared existence. Michael stared at me as if I'd spoken in a foreign language. You don't mean that. I do mean that. I want you to pack a bag tonight and find somewhere else to stay. We'll figure out the rest later, but I can't have you here right now. Claire, please. Don't make a permanent decision based on temporary emotions. We can work through this. I stood up from the couch, feeling strangely light, as if I'd been carrying a heavy weight I hadn't realized was there. My emotions aren't temporary, Michael. My marriage is. 2 months later, I stood in the empty apartment that had been our home for 8 years, watching the movers carry out the last of Michael's belongings. The space looked strange without his things larger somehow, but also more mine. The morning sunlight streaming through the windows seemed brighter without his presence to filter it. The divorce proceedings had been surprisingly civil. Michael's guilt made him generous in the settlement negotiations, and his lawyer, not surprisingly, given the circumstances, was eager to resolve things quickly and quietly. I kept the apartment, the savings account, and my dignity. He kept his practice, his BMW, and presumably Amanda Parker. I'd heard through mutual friends that they were living together now in a trendy loft in River North. The same friends whispered about how young she was, how beautiful, how it was such a shame about Michael and me. I'd stopped caring about the whispers. Other people's opinions of my life had never mattered less. My sister Rebecca had flown in from Seattle the week after the confrontation and stayed for 10 days, helping me navigate lawyers and paperwork and the strange logistics of unraveling a life. She'd wanted to stay longer, but I'd insisted I was fine. And strangely, I was fine. Better than fine, actually. You seem different, she'd said on her last morning, studying me over coffee in my kitchen. Stronger. More like the Claire I knew before you got married. I'd thought about that comment often in the weeks that followed. Had I lost myself so completely in being Michael's wife that I'd forgotten who I was without him? The evidence suggested yes. The woman who'd sat in that church parking lot watching her marriage dissolve had been passive, shocked, unable to act. The woman I was becoming was none of those things. I'd thrown myself into work with renewed energy, taking on extra shifts and volunteering for projects I'd previously avoided. My supervisor had noticed and mentioned opportunities for advancement, maybe becoming a charge nurse or pursuing the nurse practitioner degree I'd put on hold years ago because Michael thought it would interfere with our plans to start a family. We'd never had children. 4 years, it had been not yet. We wanted to travel first, get financially stable, wait until Michael made partner. Then it became a source of stress, of doctor's visits and fertility treatments, and monthly disappointments. Finally, it had become another thing we didn't talk about, another dream deferred until some mythical future when everything else was perfect. Now I wondered if the universe had been protecting me. Divorce was hard enough without children caught in the middle. And at 40, I had time to figure out what I wanted my life to look like before deciding if motherhood was still part of that picture. The apartment felt different that night after the movers left. Not empty, exactly, but clean. Cleared out, ready for whatever came next. I ordered Thai food from my favorite place and ate it sitting on the floor of what used to be our bedroom. Now just my bedroom. The silence was profound but not lonely. For the first time in months, I felt peaceful. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Hi Claire, this is Eleanor from St. Mark's. I wanted to check on you and see how you're doing." I smiled, remembering the kind church secretary who'd listened to my story and offered tea and wisdom. I'd sent her flowers after the divorce was finalized, with a note thanking her for her kindness to a stranger in crisis. "I'm doing well, Eleanor. Thank you for asking. The divorce is final now." Her response came quickly. "I'm glad you're finding peace. If you're ever looking for community, our women's book club meets Thursday evenings. We're reading Maya Angelou this month." A book club? When was the last time I'd read something that wasn't a medical journal or a magazine? When was the last time I'd done something just for the joy of it, without considering how it fit into Michael's schedule or preferences? "I'd like that," I texted back. "What time?" The next evening, I found myself back at St. Mark's Church for the first time since my marriage had ended there. But instead of sitting in my car watching betrayal unfold, I was walking through the front doors into a warmly lit fellowship hall where a dozen women of various ages sat in a circle discussing Maya Angelou's poetry. Eleanor introduced me to the group, and if any of them had heard gossip about my situation, they were too polite to mention it. We talked about resilience and transformation, about the courage it takes to reinvent yourself, about the power of telling your own story instead of letting others define your narrative. Walking to my car afterward, I realized I felt something I hadn't experienced in years: anticipation. Not for any specific thing, but for the general possibility that good things might happen. That I might discover parts of myself I'd forgotten existed. That there were still surprises waiting for me in this life. 3 weeks later, I was having coffee with Janet, one of the women from book club, when she mentioned that her daughter's nonprofit was looking for volunteers with medical experience for their community health clinics. "It's mainly serving homeless populations and undocumented immigrants," she explained. "People who don't have regular access to health care. They really need someone with your background." I'd been looking for ways to fill my newly abundant free time, and this sounded more meaningful than the gym membership or art classes I'd been considering. The next Saturday, I found myself in a converted church basement in Pilsen, taking blood pressures and helping treat minor injuries for people who had nowhere else to go. The work was challenging and heartbreaking and absolutely perfect. These patients needed someone who saw them as human beings deserving of care and dignity, not as problems to be solved or processed. I found myself staying late, learning basic Spanish phrases, advocating for follow-up care. I felt useful in a way I hadn't in years. One evening in late March, as I was packing up the mobile clinic supplies, a young mother approached me. She brought her daughter in earlier for treatment of an ear infection. "Thank you," she said in careful English. "Not just for the medicine. For seeing us. For being kind." Driving home that night through the city streets I'd navigated for 20 years, I thought about visibility. About being seen. Michael had looked at me every day for 15 years, but had he really seen me? Had he seen the woman who stayed late to comfort frightened patients, who remembered the names of her colleagues' children, who had dreams of her own that didn't revolve around his career? Or had he seen only what I'd become in relation to him, the supportive wife, the convenient companion, the woman who made his life easier but not necessarily more interesting? Amanda Parker had offered him something I couldn't: the thrill of being desired by someone new, the excitement of conquest, the validation that he was still attractive to women who didn't know his flaws and habits and fears. I couldn't compete with that fantasy version of himself, she reflected back to him. But I'd realized I didn't want to compete. The woman who'd sat in that church parking lot had been devastated by the idea of not being enough for her husband. The woman I was becoming understood that being enough for someone who didn't value what you offered wasn't actually a prize worth winning. My phone rang as I pulled into my building's parking garage. Michael's name appeared on the screen, and for a moment I considered not answering. We'd spoken only through lawyers for months, handling the practical details of dissolving our shared life. "Hello," I said, my voice neutral. "Claire." He sounded tired. "I hope it's okay that I'm calling. I know we said we'd keep communication through the attorneys, but..." "What do you need, Michael?" "I don't need anything. I wanted to apologize. Really apologize, not just say I'm sorry because it's what you're supposed to say." I waited, curious despite myself. "I've been in therapy," he continued, "trying to understand why I did what I did. And I'm starting to realize that I didn't just betray you. I betrayed the best parts of myself. The man I thought I was. The man you deserve to be married to. Okay, I said, because I wasn't sure what else to say. You were right, you know. About it being a choice, not a mistake. I chose to lie to you every day. I chose to prioritize my own ego, I guess, over our marriage. Over you. And I'm sorry. Not because I got caught. Not because I lost you. But because I became someone I don't recognize. Someone I don't like. His words were thoughtful, sincere in a way his panicked pleading that night in our apartment hadn't been. I felt something in my chest loosen. Not forgiveness exactly, but a release of the anger I hadn't realized I was still carrying. Thank you for saying that, I said. I mean that. How are you doing? Really? I thought about the question as I rode the elevator up to my apartment. How was I doing? 6 months ago, I would have answered that question in terms of my marriage, my role as Michael's wife, how we were doing. Now I had to think about just me. I'm doing well, I said, and realized it was true. I'm different than I was. Better, I think. I'm glad, he said, and he sounded like he meant it. You deserve to be happy, Claire. You always deserved better than what I gave you. After we hung up, I sat in my apartment now, not ours, and thought about closure. People talked about it like it was something you found, like a lost object you could search for and eventually locate. But maybe closure wasn't something you found. Maybe it was something you created by choosing to close the door yourself instead of waiting for someone else to close it for you. I opened my laptop and started researching nurse practitioner programs. The application deadline for fall admission was still 3 months away. I had time to prepare, to study for entrance exams, to write essays about why I wanted to advance my career. For the first time in years, I was making plans based solely on what I wanted, not what fit into someone else's timeline. The next Thursday at book club, we discussed new beginnings. Eleanor had chosen a collection of poems about transformation, and as we read passages aloud about butterflies and phoenix rising from ashes, I thought about the woman I'd been and the woman I was becoming. I think we're all works in progress, said Margaret, a widow in her 70s, who joined the group after her husband's death the previous year. The mistake is thinking we're supposed to be finished products by a certain age. The best parts of my life have happened since I turned 60. Walking to my car after the meeting, I ran into Father Martinez, the church's young pastor. We'd met briefly during one of my volunteer shifts, when he'd stopped by the community clinic to check on things. Claire, right? He said, his face lighting up with recognition. How are the Thursday evening sessions treating you? They're wonderful, I said. Eleanor mentioned you'd be starting a community garden behind the church. I'd love to help if you need volunteers. We absolutely do, he said enthusiastically. We're hoping to grow vegetables to supplement the food pantry, maybe teach some cooking classes. Do you have gardening experience? None whatsoever, I admitted, but I'm good at learning new things. And I have Saturday mornings free. As I drove home, I thought about the version of myself who'd answered that question. The old Claire would have declined, worried about not being good enough, about making mistakes, about taking on something Michael might not approve of. The new Claire was curious about dirt under her fingernails and tomatoes grown with her own hands. That weekend, I cleaned out my closets and donated 3 bags of clothes to a women's shelter. Professional dresses I'd worn to firm parties, cocktail dresses from anniversary dinners, even my wedding dress, carefully preserved in acid-free tissue paper for 15 years. Someone else could start fresh in white satin. I was done looking backward. I kept one photograph from my wedding day, not the formal portrait that had sat on our mantel, but a candid shot Rebecca had taken of me getting ready. In it, I was laughing at something off camera, my hair half done, looking young and hopeful and completely myself. That woman deserved to be remembered, even if the marriage she was preparing for hadn't survived. Spring arrived early that year, with daffodils blooming in Grant Park by mid-March, and people emerging from their winter hibernation to walk along the lakefront. I started running again, something I'd given up years ago because Michael preferred indoor workouts. The feeling of my feet hitting pavement, of my heartbeat accelerating, of my body moving through space under its own power, it felt like reclaiming something essential I'd forgotten I'd lost. On a particularly beautiful Saturday morning, I was running along the lake path when I saw them. Michael and Amanda, walking hand in hand near Navy Pier, looking like any other couple enjoying the weather. She was even more beautiful in daylight, and younger than I'd realized. Michael looked happy in a way I hadn't seen in years, relaxed and animated as he pointed out boats on the lake. I felt a brief stab of something, not jealousy exactly, but a kind of wistful recognition. That could have been us, if we'd been different people, if he'd been someone who could communicate his needs instead of seeking validation elsewhere, if I'd been someone who pushed back instead of accommodating, if we'd both been brave enough to admit we'd grown apart instead of pretending everything was fine. But it couldn't have been us, because we were who we were. And sometimes the kindest thing you can do for someone you once loved is let them go find happiness with someone who brings out better parts of them than you ever could. I ran past them without stopping, feeling lighter with each step. Behind me, the city stretched out in all its complicated beauty, the place where my marriage had ended and my new life had begun. Ahead of me, the lake path curved toward destinations I hadn't explored yet, possibilities I hadn't imagined. For the first time in months, I wasn't running away from anything. I was running toward whatever came next. That evening, I called Rebecca. I saw Michael today, I told her. With her. And I felt okay about it. Really okay, or pretending to be okay. Really okay. They looked happy. And I realized I hope they are happy. Not because I'm some saint who forgives all betrayals, but because their happiness has nothing to do with mine anymore. That's huge, Claire. I know. 6 months ago, I would have gone home and cried and wondered what she had that I didn't. Today I went home and researched graduate programs and planned what to plant in the church garden. What are you going to grow? I thought about the question, about seeds and soil and the faith it takes to plant something and trust it will grow. Everything, I said. I'm going to grow everything. Later that night, I stood at my bedroom window looking out at the Chicago skyline, the same view I'd stared at on the night my marriage ended. The city looked the same, millions of lights twinkling in the darkness, but I saw it differently now. Not as a place where I'd been betrayed and abandoned, but as a place full of people starting over, making new choices, becoming new versions of themselves. Somewhere out there, Michael and Amanda were probably having dinner, planning their future together, building something on the ruins of what he and I had shared. Somewhere else, other couples were discovering betrayals, making impossible choices, learning who they were when the structures that defined them fell away. And here I was, 40 years old and starting fresh, with no idea what the next chapter would bring but no longer afraid of not knowing. The woman who'd sat in that church parking lot 6 months ago had been terrified of uncertainty, desperate to return to the familiar, even when the familiar was killing her slowly. The woman I'd become understood that uncertainty was just another word for possibility. I pulled out my phone and opened my notes app, starting a list of things I wanted to try. Rock climbing, pottery classes, learning Italian, maybe even dating eventually when the idea didn't make me feel exhausted. The list grew longer than I'd expected, full of dreams I'd deferred or forgotten, or never allowed myself to have. Tomorrow was Sunday. I'd sleep late, make pancakes for one, tend to the seedlings growing on my windowsill, and maybe drive out to see the community garden plot we'd be breaking ground on next weekend. Simple pleasures, but chosen freely, without considering anyone else's preferences or schedule. The car might have been parked behind the church that night in November, and she might have been in the back seat with him, but I was the one who'd driven away. I was the one who'd chosen to leave, to start over, to bet on myself instead of settling for someone else's scraps of attention. It had been the right choice. It had been the only choice. And now, for the first time in longer than I could remember, every choice that came next would be mine alone to make.